Hey guys, tonight we're going to step back into the Grand Roman Empire, a world of emperors, gladiators, and magnificent architecture. We often imagine Roman citizens as powerful adults, but what about the littlest Romans tonight? We're going to dive into what life was really like for Roman children. And let me tell you, it was far from the carefree, protected upbringing we might expect. We're talking about a level of vulnerability, harsh discipline, and predetermined destinies that, frankly, you probably wouldn't survive past your early childhood. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening, drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself transported to a Roman household in 1st century CE Rome. The sounds of the city, distant chariot wheels, vendors shouting, children playing, drift in through the open windows. As you observe a typical Roman family, a chilling reality about your earliest moments unfolds precarious beginnings father's fateful gaze. The very continuation of your life, as a Roman newborn, rested entirely upon the absolute and terrifying power of your father. The paterfamilias. Imagine you are a Roman infant, having just entered the world in the dimly lit birthing room of a Roman domus. The air is thick with the scent of herbs and effort. Midwives, if available, have assisted your mother through a perilous delivery, but your immediate future is not in your mother's hands, nor is it guaranteed. It rests entirely on the decision of one person, your father. According to Roman custom and law, the newborn infant would be gently placed on the ground at the feet of the paterfamilias, the undisputed head of the household. This was a critical moment, a solemn ritual known as tollere filium to lift the child. His decision was absolute. If the father picked up the child, it was a formal act of acceptance. The child was acknowledged as his legitimate offspring, welcomed into the family, and would be raised. This was the moment you officially became part of that Roman household, gaining a name and the promise of a future, however harsh. However, if the father left the child on the ground, or explicitly commanded its exposure, the infant was legally rejected. This practice, known as infanticide through exposure, was a grim reality. The child would be taken outside, often to a designated public place like the columna lactaria, or milk column, where abandoned infants might be left for others to find, or to die, and left to perish from exposure, starvation, or animal attack. This decision was legally binding, and there was nothing the mother or anyone else could do to override it. Imagine your mother, having just endured the agonizing pain of childbirth, watching helplessly as your fate hung in the balance, entirely dependent on your father's gaze. The emotional toll on her must have been immense, a constant dread with every pregnancy. Why would a Roman father choose to expose a child? The reasons, while horrifying to us today, were pragmatic in the ancient world. Gender preference. Female infants were disproportionately exposed. Sons were highly valued for continuing the family name gens, inheriting property, and participating in public life. Daughters, while important for forging alliances through marriage, were often seen as a financial burden, requiring dowries and offering less direct contribution to the family's public standing. If a family already had several daughters or limited resources, a newborn girl might be deemed superfluous, deformity, or illness. If an infant was born with a visible physical disability or appeared sickly, the paterfamilias might decide it was not viable or would be a drain on family resources. The idea was to prevent a prolonged life of suffering for the child and a burden for the family. This pragmatic, almost utilitarian approach to nascent life is chilling to our modern sensibilities, which prioritize the inherent value of every human life from birth. Economic hardship. A poor family, unable to feed another mouth, might reluctantly resort to exposure as a desperate measure to ensure the survival of existing children. It's a grim reminder of the stark realities of survival in a world without social safety nets. While exposure was legally sanctioned, some exposed infants might be found and rescued by others. Sometimes, childless couples would adopt them. More cynically, some might be taken by individuals who would raise them for future servitude or prostitution, a fate often worse than death itself. This rescue was not always benevolent. Historians still debate the precise frequency of infanticide through exposure across different social classes and periods, though its legal permissibility and evidence for its practice, especially through archaeological findings of infant burials, are widely accepted. So, as you reflect on the beginnings of Roman life, remember that for every Roman child who thrived, there were countless others whose lives were tragically cut short by the fateful gaze of their father. Your very right to exist, as a Roman newborn, was conditional, subject to the absolute power of the paterfamilias, making your precarious beginnings a truly terrifying start to life. It makes you deeply appreciate the safety and security that modern societal norms afford to every newborn, doesn't it? You've just witnessed the chilling power of the paterfamilias over a newborn, a truly precarious beginning for any Roman child. But even for those deemed worthy of being lifted, their journey into life was fraught with immediate and constant peril. Infant mortality, life's brutal gamble. The shocking rates of child death and the constant, crushing grief endured by Roman parents cast a long, dark shadow over every household. Imagine your first few months of life as a Roman infant. You are tiny, vulnerable, utterly dependent. There are no modern vaccines, no antibiotics, no sterile environments. Every cough, every fever, every slight upset in your delicate system could rapidly escalate into a life-threatening illness. You are constantly battling unseen enemies, microscopic killers that medieval physicians had no understanding of. The statistics are truly heartbreaking. It's estimated that a staggering 30–50% of Roman children died before their first birthday, and a significant number more would perish before reaching the age of 10. Imagine giving birth to 5 or 6 children, only for half of them, or even more, to never reach school age, never truly have a chance at life. This wasn't an anomaly, it was a grim, accepted reality of Roman life, woven into the fabric of every family's existence. So, what were these invisible killers that claimed so many young lives? Waterborne diseases Rome. For all its impressive aqueducts, still had pervasive sanitation issues. Contaminated water from public fountains or private wells, often mixed with human and animal waste, was a constant source of deadly infections. Imagine a Roman infant given water that, unbeknownst to the parents, carried the bacteria for dysentery or typhoid. These diseases, causing severe diarrhea and dehydration, would quickly overwhelm a tiny body, leading to rapid and agonizing death. Respiratory infections. The crowded conditions of Roman homes, whether a cramped insula apartment or a more spacious domus, were ideal breeding grounds for airborne pathogens. Pneumonia, bronchitis, and other severe respiratory infections swept through families. Imagine a small infant, its lungs already delicate, succumbing to a persistent cough that rapidly worsened, making every breath a struggle in the smoky, poorly ventilated indoor spaces. Smallpox and measles. These highly contagious viral diseases were endemic in the Roman world. While adults might survive, children were particularly vulnerable. Smallpox, and as you recall, could leave survivors horribly disfigured, but for infants it was often a swift and brutal killer. A single infected visitor to the household could doom all the young children within. Malnutrition and contaminated food. Even if food was available, and its preparation and storage could be problematic. Without refrigeration, food spoiled quickly. Basic hygiene and food handling was often lacking. And for infants, the very act of weaning could be perilous, as they were introduced to new foods that might be difficult to digest or already contaminated. Lack of medical understanding. Roman medicine, while advanced in some areas like surgery, had no concept of germ theory. Physicians had rudimentary tools and limited knowledge of pediatric care. They could do little to combat internal infections or severe childhood illnesses. Remedies were often based on superstition, herbal concoctions, or practices like bloodletting, which could further weaken a fragile infant. You'd resort to amulets, prayers, and desperate pleas to household gods, knowing that practical medical help was severely limited. While Roman medical texts mention various childhood ailments and remedies, a modern epidemiological understanding of specific infant mortality causes has largely come from skeletal analyses and comparative studies with other pre-industrial societies, highlighting the brutal impact of infectious disease and poor sanitation. The emotional toll on Roman parents was immense. You would likely experience the profound grief of losing multiple children throughout your reproductive years. A mother might give birth to 5, 7, or even 10 children, only for half or more of them to never reach adulthood. This constant shadow of death must have fundamentally shaped parental attachment. While affection undoubtedly existed, it might have been tempered by a pragmatic, almost defensive emotional distance, a learned coping mechanism to prepare for inevitable loss. It's a stark contrast to our modern expectations, where every infant is cherished and expected to thrive into adulthood. Funerary practices reflect this grim reality. Infant and child burials are common in Roman archaeological sites, often with simple grave goods, a poignant testament to the brevity of these young lives. The parents would hold small ceremonies, offering prayers to the gods of the underworld, but the grief would be personal, often unspoken, buried deep beneath the demands of daily life. So, as you watch a Roman child at play, remember the immense gamble their early life represented. Infant mortality was a terrifying, pervasive reality, making childhood a brutal gamble where millions of tiny lives were extinguished by unseen killers. It makes you profoundly grateful for modern medical care, vaccinations, and safe drinking water, doesn't it? Så det tror vi Anders Jangcholen Taibatus. 3, Fan 3. You've faced the heartbreaking reality of Roman infant mortality. For those children who survived the perilous early years, their foundational education wasn't found in formal schools for quite some time. Instead, their earliest lessons began right at home, under the watchful eyes of their mother and, often, their enslaved nursemaid's home as school, mother's early lessons. This period shaped their moral character and instilled the fundamental Roman virtues. Imagine yourself as a Roman child, having survived infancy, now perhaps a toddler or young boy or girl up to the age of 7. Your world is largely confined to the domus, your family home. There are no preschools or kindergartens. Your education is entirely domestic, and your primary teacher is your mother mater familias, regardless of your family's social standing. She is not just a caregiver, she is the first and most influential educator in your life. Your mother's lessons focus on instilling the core Roman virtues, pietas. This was far more than just piety. It encompassed duty and devotion to the gods, to your family, and to the state. You'd learn to respect your elders, particularly your father pater familias, and to participate in daily household religious rituals, offering prayers and libations to the household gods Lares and Penates. Imagine mimicking your mother's gestures as she makes an offering, learning the solemnity of your family's religious duties. Gravitas, a sense of dignity, seriousness, and responsibility. You'd be taught to be composed, to control your emotions, and to understand the weight of your actions. This wasn't about being joyful or carefree, it was about learning appropriate conduct for a future Roman citizen or matron. Frugalitas, thriftiness and simplicity. Despite potential wealth, Roman children were often taught the value of avoiding excessive luxury and living modestly. This virtue aimed to curb extravagance and promote self-control. Virtus for boys, this meant manliness or excellence, encompassing courage, strength, and civic duty. For girls, it often meant chastity and domestic prowess. These lessons weren't taught from textbooks. They were imparted through example, storytelling, and direct instruction within the daily rhythm of the home. Your mother would tell you stories of legendary Roman heroes, of courageous ancestors and of virtuous women, illustrating the ideals you were expected to embody. You'd learn by observing her meticulous management of the household, her interactions with enslaved staff, and her dignified conduct. For many Roman children, especially those from wealthier families, a crucial figure in their early education was the nutrix, the enslaved nursemaid. She would be your primary caregiver, often responsible for feeding, bathing, and comforting you. If she was of Greek origin, as many were, she would often begin teaching you Greek from a very young age. Imagine hearing Greek lullabies in simple phrases, learning a second language almost effortlessly as part of your daily interactions. This early exposure to Greek was highly prized among the Roman elite, preparing children for a later, more advanced education in Greek literature and philosophy. While literary sources often highlight the nurturing role of the nutrix, historians also emphasize her legal status as enslaved property and the inherent power imbalance in such relationships, creating a complex and often debated dynamic within the Roman household. Basic literacy and numeracy were also introduced at home. Your mother, or the enslaved nursemaid/tutor, might teach you the alphabet, how to write simple words on a wax tablet with a stylus, and how to count using your fingers or simple pebbles calculi. This wasn't structured schooling, it was more akin to informal tutoring, preparing you for the possibility of formal education later. If your family decided it was appropriate, physical development was also part of this home education. Boys would be encouraged in rudimentary physical play to develop strength and agility. Girls would learn basic domestic tasks, like helping with spinning wool or preparing simple meals, gradually easing into their future roles as household managers. This early childhood period was often a mixture of discipline and affection. While corporal punishment was common in Roman society, especially in schools, mothers were also sources of warmth and comfort. However, the omnipresent shadow of the paterfamilias's absolute authority meant that even the loving lessons of a mother were ultimately subservient to his will. For children from poorer families, this home-based education often formed the entirety of their schooling. There was no money for tutors or formal schools. Their mothers would teach them the basic life skills necessary for survival, simple literacy, if any, practical tasks for the farm or workshop, and the moral virtues that would allow them to navigate their place in Roman society. So, as you envision a young Roman child, remember that their earliest years were spent in their home as school, where their mother's early lessons and often an enslaved nursemaid's quiet teachings shaped their character and prepared them for the rigid demands of Roman life. It was an intimate, foundational period, far removed from the public spectacle of later education or the bustling classrooms of today. It certainly makes you appreciate your own structured childhood education, doesn't it? So to Bilfander, Chang Cholen Tieptuk, Far, Fan 4. You've experienced the intimate domestic education of a Roman child's earliest years. But for boys from wealthier families, a new, harsher world awaited them around the age of 7 formal schooling. A privilege, not a right. This wasn't the nurturing, universally accessible education we know today. It was often brutal, rudimentary, and reserved for a select few. Imagine yourself as a young Roman boy, barely 7 years old, clutching your wax tablet and stylus. You're not heading to a brightly lit, purpose-built school building. Instead, your classroom might be a rented room in a cramped insula, a multi-storied apartment block, a noisy portico in the bustling forum, or even just a shaded corner of a public bathhouse. Anywhere the literator, the elementary teacher, could set up a few crude stools and perhaps a small, shaky table. The air would be filled with the cacophony of the city, vendors shouting, chariots rumbling, distant crowds murmuring, constantly competing with the monotonous drone of lessons. Concentration was a skill in itself, almost as difficult as the subjects you were meant to master. Your literator was rarely a highly respected or well-paid professional. Often, he was a Greek freedman or an enslaved person, sometimes of questionable education themselves, simply trying to eke out a living. Their primary job was to teach you the absolute basics reading, writing, and arithmetic. This was not a creative or engaging process. It was overwhelmingly based on rote memorization and repetitive drills. For reading, you'd start with individual letters, then syllables, then words, meticulously copying them onto your wax tablet. Imagine the dull, repetitive task of scratching out the same letter, the same simple word, over and over again, until your hand ached and your eyes blurred. There were no colorful picture books, no engaging stories to make learning fun. You'd learn from dry, didactic texts, often maxims or lists of words, designed purely for memorization. Writing was equally tedious. You'd use a stylus, a pointed stick to scratch letters onto a wax tablet, which could then be smoothed over and reused. For more permanent work, you'd painstakingly copy text onto papyrus or parchment, materials that were expensive and therefore used sparingly. Imagine the immense effort required to form each letter perfectly. The frustration of making a mistake and having to start over, all while the literator loomed over you. Your early attempts would be clumsy, crooked lines, a far cry from the elegant script of the adults. Arithmetic was purely practical. You'd learn basic counting, addition, subtraction, and perhaps some simple multiplication, using an abacus accounting board or by manipulating Pebble's calculi. This was focused on the calculations necessary for daily Roman life, managing simple household accounts, measuring goods, or counting money. There was no abstract theory, no playful problem solving. It was pure, unadulterated computation. But the most pervasive and terrifying aspect of this early education was the brutal discipline. The literator rarely spared the rod. Corporal punishment was not just common, it was expected. Whips made from leather or bundles of sticks like the ferula or cane were standard teaching aids. A misspelled word, a poor calculation, a moment of inattention, or even a simple fidget could earn you a swift, stinging blow to the hand or back. Imagine sitting in constant fear, your stomach clenched, knowing that any mistake could result in physical pain. The air in the classroom would often be punctuated by the sharp crack of the cane and the whimpers or cries of a punished child. This constant threat of physical violence created a climate of fear, not a love of learning. It instilled obedience, certainly, but at the cost of genuine intellectual curiosity. It was a system designed to drill information into young minds through intimidation and repetition, rather than fostering understanding or critical thought. There was no concept of positive reinforcement or individualized learning. It was a one-size-fits-all, fear-driven approach. While vivid literary descriptions of harsh Roman schoolmasters exist, direct archaeological evidence of specific disciplinary tools used in classrooms is scarce. Though the general use of physical punishment in ancient childhood is well documented, the classroom environment itself was often chaotic and noisy. With dozens of boys crammed into a small, open space, each working at their own pace, the literator would struggle to maintain order. The sounds of scratching styluses, muffled recitations, the murmur of the city, and the ever-present threat of the cane would create a jarring, stressful atmosphere. It was hardly conducive to deep learning, but rather to surviving the daily ordeal. This inherent inequality meant that Roman society, for all its sophistication, was fundamentally stratified by educational opportunity. Literacy rates, while higher than some earlier ancient societies, were still far from universal. Only a minority of the male population, primarily from the wealthier classes, would advance beyond basic literacy. This created a profound divide, where knowledge and power remained concentrated in the hands of the educated elite. So, as you picture a young Roman boy heading off to his first school, remember that this wasn't a journey to enlightenment. It was a descent into a brutal, monotonous, and often terrifying world of rote memorization and physical discipline. Formal schooling was indeed a privilege, not a right, ensuring that Roman education, for all its eventual grandeur, started with a whimper, often accompanied by the crack of a whip. It makes your own elementary school days seem like a glorious vacation, doesn't it? Fiance. Fun 5. You've explored the harsh realities of elementary school for Roman boys. But for many Roman children, especially those from the vast majority of the population, formal schooling was an unattainable dream. Instead, their childhood was abruptly cut short by the demands of survival child labor, work's early demands. From a tender age, these children were thrust into grueling, uncompensated labor, their lives defined by arduous toil rather than carefree play or academic pursuits. Imagine yourself as a Roman child of a poor family, perhaps in the bustling city, or more likely, in the vast agricultural countryside. You wouldn't be 7 years old, dreaming of a literator's school. Your education would begin much earlier, perhaps as young as 4 or 5 years old, by assisting your parents in their daily work. This wasn't about learning a trade for the future, it was about immediate contribution to the family's survival. If you were a boy from a farming family, your days would be spent in the fields. Imagine accompanying your father, your small hands learning to pull weeds from between the rows of grain, or gathering fallen olives. As you grew a little older, perhaps 7 or 8, your tasks would become more demanding, scaring birds from crops, carrying water to the workers, or helping to lead the livestock to pasture. You'd learn to handle rudimentary tools, often too large for your small hands, and your body would ache from bending, lifting, and endless walking under the relentless sun. Every season brought its own relentless chores: planting, weeding, harvesting, threshing, all done by hand, and you were expected to contribute. While precise ages for child labor varied by region and specific task, archaeological evidence and textual sources indicate widespread involvement of children in agricultural activities from a very young age in ancient societies, including Rome, as their labor was essential for family survival. If your family was involved in a craft or trade, your childhood would be an early apprenticeship. Imagine working in a potter's workshop, your small hands kneading clay or turning a rudimentary wheel, or in a blacksmith's forge, stoking fires and pounding metal. In a baker's shop, you might be grinding grain or kneading dough. This work was often dangerous, involving heavy objects, sharp tools, or intense heat. Accidents were common, and a severe injury could lead to lifelong disability, ruining your future prospects. You would learn by observation and repetition, your play becoming the mastery of a skill, your body pushed to its limits. For girls from poor families, their labor was primarily within the household, but it was no less demanding. From a very young age, you'd learn alongside your mother, performing countless chores. Imagine carrying water from the communal well, a heavy bucket straining your small arms, or tirelessly grinding grain with a hand quern, the repetitive motion exhausting your entire body. You'd learn to gather firewood, tend to younger siblings, and assist with cooking over an open hearth, enduring the smoke and heat. As you grew older, you'd be heavily involved in textile production, cleaning raw wool, spinning it into thread, and then weaving it into fabric. This was incredibly time-consuming, essential for clothing the family, and demanded immense patience and dexterity. The most brutal form of child labor was for those born into slavery. If your parents were enslaved, you were born into bondage, and your childhood was immediately defined by your status as property. You could be forced to work in harsh conditions, from domestic drudgery to dangerous tasks in mines or on large agricultural estates. Your body was not your own, and your labor was uncompensated, serving only your master's needs. Imagine being a very young enslaved child, sent to a particularly cruel master with no one to protect you from overwork or abuse. For all these children, the concept of a carefree childhood, dedicated to play and learning, was a distant fantasy. Their lives were defined by necessity. Their labor was not optional, it was absolutely crucial for their family's survival, or for the wealth of their masters. There were no child labor laws, no protections for young workers. Their bodies, as still developing, were pushed to their limits by adult demands. The pervasive nature of child labor meant that childhood was often very short in ancient Rome. Children were seen as miniature adults, expected to contribute from an early age. This early entry into the workforce contributed to physical wear and tear, susceptibility to illness, and often a reduced lifespan. Their bodies were aged prematurely by the constant physical strain. So, as you observe the children of ancient Rome, remember that for countless thousands, childhood was an illusion. Their days were filled with work's early demands, a relentless cycle of child labor that defined their lives from their earliest years, ensuring that for many, Roman childhood was a period of harsh toil rather than innocent play. It makes you incredibly grateful for modern child labor laws and the opportunity for a proper childhood, doesn't it? So to waffener Jiang Chou Len Tieptosi. 6. Fun 6. You've explored the demanding realities of child labor, where play was a luxury for many. But even for those Roman children who had some time for recreation, or who came from wealthier families, playtime's harsh realities simple. Scant joy defined their amusement. Roman childhood was far from the imaginative, toy-filled, and safe play we associate with children today. Imagine yourself as a Roman child of a relatively well-off family, perhaps a boy of 8 or 9, with a few hours free from your literator's lessons, or a girl of the same age, taking a break from learning to spin wool. Your options for entertainment are incredibly basic, reflecting the lack of mass-produced toys, structured activities, and dedicated play spaces. One of the most common forms of play involved simple games with readily available materials. Boys might play with marbles often made of clay, stone, or glass, rolling them in the dirt or attempting to hit targets. They might use knucklebones tali from sheep or goats for games of chance or skill, tossing them like dice. Imagine the dust clinging to your hands, the rough feel of the bones as you squat on the ground, engrossed in a game. For girls, dolls were common, though they were far from the elaborate dolls of today. Made from wood, clay, bone, or even cloth, these were simple figures, often crudely carved, reflecting the basic craftsmanship of the time. Imagine dressing your doll in scraps of fabric, pretending it was a tiny Roman matron. They might also play with miniature household objects, mimicking the domestic roles they would soon inhabit. Archaeological excavations in Roman sites frequently uncover such simple toys, marbles, knucklebones, and dolls, confirming their widespread use among children of various social classes. Both boys and girls played board games. These were not mass-produced, elaborate sets, but often involved simply scratching a grid into the dirt or a piece of wood, and using pebbles, nuts, or broken pottery shards as markers. Games akin to tic-tac-toe, checkers, or simple racing games were popular. Imagine the intense concentration, the dust under your fingernails as you strategize your next move on a makeshift board. Outdoor play was common, often unsupervised. Boys might engage in running, jumping, and wrestling, mimicking the physical prowess expected of future Roman citizens and soldiers. They might play with balls made of leather filled with feathers or hair, kicking or throwing them. These games were often rough and tumble, lacking formal rules or safety precautions. A scraped knee, a twisted ankle, or a bruised eye was a common outcome, taken in stride as part of childhood. Imagine a chaotic game of catch in the crowded streets, dodging pedestrians and stray animals, your laughter echoing through the narrow alleys. Children from wealthier families might have access to more refined toys like miniature chariots or toy soldiers made of bronze or ivory. They might also have a hoop and stick for rolling, or a top to spin. But even these were simple devices, relying more on the child's imagination than on intricate design. The lack of dedicated play spaces was a significant reality. Children often played in the streets, in public forums, or in the courtyards of their homes, constantly exposed to the noise and dangers of adult life. There were no designated playgrounds with soft surfaces or safety equipment. Playing in the streets meant dodging chariots, avoiding merchants, and enduring the constant bustle of urban life. And for children of the poor, or enslaved children, playtime was almost non-existent. Their days were consumed by labor, leaving little to no time or energy for frivolous activities. Their toys were often found objects, and their games were integrated into their chores, such as racing to carry water or competing to weed a section of the field. The profound simplicity of these games, the reliance on basic materials and imagination, stands in stark contrast to the vast array of sophisticated toys and entertainment options available to modern children. Roman childhood, even at its most playful, was still largely tethered to the realities of a demanding world. Joy was often scant, snatched in brief moments of shared amusement. So, as you picture a Roman child at play, remember that their entertainment was born of necessity and simplicity. Playtime's harsh realities meant simple, scant joy, a testament to a childhood where imaginative play flourished not because of abundance, but despite its profound absence of material comforts and structured leisure. It truly makes you appreciate your childhood toy chest, doesn't it? No, so to elas handawan jangcho len tiep tutse. Seven. Fan 7. You've explored the simplicity and limitations of Roman playtime. But as a Roman child, your path in life, and consequently your education and future, were largely predetermined by one crucial factor: your gender. This led to gendered destinies, boys versus girls paths, a stark division in expectations, training, and ultimate societal roles that shaped every aspect of your upbringing. Imagine yourself as a young Roman child. From the moment of your birth, assuming your father chose to raise you, your gender immediately set you on one of two fundamentally different trajectories. Roman society, while valuing both sexes in their respective spheres, had very rigid expectations for sons and daughters. For Roman boys, your destiny was inextricably linked to the public sphere and the continuation of your family's name and legacy. Education. Your formal education would be longer and more academically rigorous. After basic literacy and numeracy with the literator, you would progress to the grammaticus for extensive study of Latin and Greek literature, grammar, and rhetoric. The ultimate goal, especially for elite boys, was the school of the rhetor, where you'd train in public speaking and argumentation. This education was explicitly designed to prepare you for a life in politics, law, or military command. Imagine the pressure of mastering rhetoric, knowing your future influence hinged on your ability to persuade and debate in the forum. Social role. Your destiny was to become a Roman citizen, a civis Romanus with the right to vote, hold public office, serve in the legions, and enter into legal contracts. You were expected to embody Roman virtues like virtuous manliness, courage, and gravitas dignity. Seriousness. Your life was meant to be lived publicly, contributing to the glory of Rome through military service, legal advocacy, or political leadership. Inheritance. As a son, you were the primary inheritor of your father's property and, crucially, his patria potestas upon his death. You would become the next paterfamilias, continuing the family line and its ancestral cult. This responsibility, while a source of power, also brought immense pressure to maintain and enhance the family's standing. For Roman girls, your destiny was almost entirely confined to the domestic sphere and the vital, yet often unacknowledged, role of managing a household and raising the next generation. Education. Your formal education was typically much shorter and less academic. While you would learn basic literacy and numeracy at home, or with a literator for a few years, you would rarely progress to the advanced stages of grammar or rhetoric. Your education emphasized practical skills: spinning wool, weaving fabric, cooking, and household management. You would learn how to supervise enslaved staff, preserve food, and oversee daily domestic operations. For elite girls, some Greek might be taught for cultural refinement, but always within the home. Imagine spending countless hours at the loom, knowing your skill in weaving was as valued as your brother's ability to deliver a speech. While textual evidence often highlights the domestic focus of girls' education, archaeological finds of writing implements and literary references to learned women suggest that for some elite girls, intellectual pursuits within the home were more extensive than traditionally assumed, though public roles remained excluded. Social role. Your destiny was to become a virtuous Roman wife and mother mater familias. Your primary duties were to bear legitimate children, especially sons to continue your husband's lineage, to maintain the honor of your family through your chastity pudicitia, and to run an efficient household. Your influence was largely indirect, through your husband and sons, and your public presence was minimal, confined mostly to religious festivals or family events. Inheritance. While daughters could inherit property, their property was often managed by a male guardian tutor, or came under the control of their husband in certain types of marriage. You were not expected to continue the family name in the same direct way a son was. Your ultimate legal standing remained one of perpetual dependence on a male authority figure. These gendered destinies were rigidly enforced by Roman law, social custom, and pervasive societal expectations. There was very little room for deviation. A girl who attempted to pursue a public role would be ridiculed. A boy who neglected his civic duties for domestic pursuits would be shamed. From their earliest moments, Roman children were funneled into paths that were starkly different, shaping their identities, their skills, and their ultimate places in society. So, as you envision Roman children, remember that their childhood was a period of preparation for these very distinct, often unyielding roles. Gendered destinies meant that boys versus girls paths diverged sharply from a very young age, ensuring that Roman society, for all its complexities, remained deeply structured by its expectations for its future men and women. It makes you incredibly grateful for the broader range of choices and opportunities available to all genders today, doesn't it? So do twashi fames sanctulen tieptag. Old. Fanate. You've explored the deeply gendered paths that shaped Roman children's lives. But for a significant portion of them, their destiny was even more tragically predetermined from birth slavery's shadow. Bondage from birth. For countless Roman children, their childhood was entirely defined by their status as property, denying them freedom, personal autonomy, and the very concept of a future not dictated by a master. Imagine a Roman household, perhaps a large and wealthy domus. You, a child, are born within its walls. But your birth is not a joyous occasion of new freedom. If your mother is an enslaved woman, you are born into slavery, regardless of who your father is. Your first cry in the world is the sound of your entry into bondage. Your life hot from that very moment is not your own. You are legally the property of your mother's owner. This system of hereditary slavery was pervasive in ancient Rome. It meant that entire generations lived and died in chains, a cycle almost impossible to break without the direct intervention of an owner. You were born a verna, an enslaved person born within the household, and your entire existence was defined by your mother's legal status, not by your own merits, potential, or even your dreams. As an enslaved child, your childhood was starkly different from that of a free Roman child, even a poor one. No childhood play. While free children might have some time for simple games, your days would soon be consumed by labor. As young as 4 or 5, you would be expected to assist with chores, often menial and repetitive. Imagine your small hands learning to fetch water, or sweep floors, or tend to a master's clothes. Your play was often integrated into your tasks, or simply non-existent. Your body, still developing, would be pushed by adult demands, denying you the carefree exploration essential for a child's growth. Lack of education. While some enslaved children might receive basic literacy if they were destined for roles as scribes or tutors, as we touched on previously, this was pragmatic training to enhance their value as property, not a true education for personal enrichment. Most enslaved children received no formal schooling. Their learning was solely focused on the skills needed for their servitude, whether domestic, agricultural, or industrial. Imagine watching free children go off to their literator's school, knowing that such a path was forever close to you. Vulnerability to sale. Your connection to your enslaved mother, father, or siblings was incredibly fragile. Your owner could sell any of you at any time for any reason, to raise funds, to settle a debt, or simply because they were displeased. Imagine the constant fear of being separated from your family, knowing that any day, you or a loved one could be sold to a different owner, never to be seen again. This profound insecurity stripped you of emotional stability and the comfort of lasting bonds. While some enslaved individuals formed strong bonds with their owners or fellow enslaved people, the constant threat of separation due to sale or inheritance meant these relationships were inherently precarious, a reality often discussed by historians examining the emotional toll of slavery, physical and sexual vulnerability. As an enslaved child, you were entirely at the mercy of your owner. Physical punishment, from beatings to more severe cruelties, was permissible under Roman law. You had no legal recourse against abuse. For enslaved girls and boys, the terrifying reality of sexual exploitation was a constant threat. Their bodies considered property subject to their owner's desires. Imagine living in constant fear of violence or violation, with no one to protect you and no legal avenue for justice. The psychological toll of growing up in bondage was immense. The knowledge that you were not a person but a possession, that your future was not your own, and that your life was defined by the arbitrary will of another, would instill a profound sense of helplessness and despair. You learned obedience out of fear. Your spirit slowly eroded by the pervasive reality of your servitude. This system of inherited slavery was fundamental to Roman society. The vast wealth, the leisure of citizens, the very functioning of the Roman economy and households depended heavily on the uncompensated labor of millions of enslaved individuals, many of whom were born into that condition. It was a stark contrast to the Roman ideals of freedom and citizenship, highlighting the profound moral blind spot at the heart of their civilization. So, as you reflect on Roman childhood, remember that for a significant, uncounted number of children, their earliest experiences were shaped not by play or formal education, but by slavery's shadow. Born into bondage from birth, their lives were a relentless struggle for survival. Devoid of personal freedom and subjected to the arbitrary will of others, a truly horrifying legacy in a supposedly advanced society. It makes you profoundly grateful for the fundamental human right to liberty, doesn't it? Så det var 100, Jangcholen Tieptuk 9. Fanin. You've witnessed the grim realities of childhood in bondage, where a child's very existence was defined by servitude. For those Roman children who survived the perilous early years and the rigors of education, whether formal or informal, their journey involved an abrupt, often jarring transition coming of age. Abrupt transitions. These were ritualized moments that marked a sudden shift from the relative innocence and dependence of childhood to the demanding responsibilities of adulthood, often with little preparation. Imagine yourself as a Roman boy around the age of 14 to 17. Your childhood, defined by tutors, wax tablets, and games with knucklebones, is about to end abruptly. The most significant rite of passage for you is the assumption of the toga virilis, the toga of manhood. This wasn't just changing clothes, it was a profound public declaration of your new status. On a designated day, often the Liberalia Festival, March 17th, your father would lead you from your home to the forum. You would ceremonially lay aside your bulla, a protective amulet worn since infancy, and your toga praetexta, a toga with a purple border, worn by children, and then don the plain, white toga virilis. Imagine the weight of the fabric, the sudden realization that you are no longer a boy, but a man in the eyes of Roman law. This was often followed by a sacrifice to the household gods and an offering to the public gods, usually at the temple of Liber on the Capitoline Hill. After this ceremony, your education, particularly in rhetoric, would intensify as you prepared for a public career. You would begin to attend the forum regularly, shadowing your father or an influential patron, learning the intricacies of Roman politics and legal procedures firsthand. You were now expected to participate in civic life, to perform military service, and to begin thinking about marriage and establishing your own household. Imagine the sudden, immense pressure of these new responsibilities. A rapid shift from the structured environment of the school to the cutthroat world of Roman public life. With little time to adjust, While the toga virilis ritual marked a clear legal transition, historians debate the exact age and social flexibility of when this occurred, as some boys from less affluent families might assume the toga later to prolong their dependence or for practical reasons. For Roman girls, the transition to adulthood was equally abrupt, but centered entirely around marriage. While boys had a ritual marking their public entry into manhood, girls had no equivalent public ceremony. Their transition was marked by their wedding day, which typically occurred at a very young age, often between 12 and 18 years old. Imagine being a young girl, your childhood ending with a marriage ceremony, suddenly transferred to a new household, and legally placed under the authority of your husband or his paterfamilias. This transition brought with it immediate and immense responsibilities. You were no longer playing with dolls. You were expected to become the mater familias, managing a complex household, overseeing enslaved staff, and, most crucially, preparing for motherhood. The pressure to conceive and bear children, especially sons, would begin immediately. Your practical education and domestic skills, learned since childhood, now became a matter of daily survival and marital duty. Imagine the emotional shock of this abrupt shift, from the protected, albeit controlled world of your father's home to the demands of your husband's household and the terrifying perils of childbirth. There was often little formal preparation for these abrupt transitions. Children were taught the skills they would need, but the psychological shift from being a dependent child to an adult with immense responsibilities was sudden and profound. They were expected to simply step into their new roles, without question or hesitation. This rapid shift, without the gradual independence common in modern adolescence, could be disorienting and stressful. For children of the poor or enslaved, the transition was even less marked by ritual and more by raw necessity. Their coming of age was typically defined by their physical ability to perform full adult labor. For an enslaved child, there was no toga, no marriage ceremony marking a new freedom. Their transition simply meant more arduous work, and perhaps increased vulnerability to sale or exploitation. Their childhood effectively ended when their bodies were strong enough to be considered full productive units. These abrupt transitions meant that the concept of adolescence, as a distinct period of gradual maturation and self-discovery, was largely absent in Roman society. Children were seen as either dependents or miniature adults, quickly propelled into their predetermined roles by legal custom and societal expectation. So, as you reflect on Roman childhood, remember that it culminated in a series of abrupt transitions. Boys donned the toga of manhood, girls embarked on marriage, and for all, the demanding responsibilities of adulthood arrived suddenly, often with little emotional preparation. This was coming of age, a rapid shift from innocence to the weighty duties of a Roman citizen or matron, ensuring that the paths of Roman children were set, often unyielding, from a very young age. It truly makes you appreciate the extended period of modern adolescence, doesn't it? So to 1100 Zhang Qiulen Tiep Duk, Ted Fantian, you've explored the precarious beginnings, the brutal infant mortality, the home-based education, the harsh realities of formal schooling for some, the early demands of child labor, the scant joys of playtime, the rigid gendered destinies, the grim shadow of slavery from birth, and the abrupt transitions into adulthood. As we conclude our journey through the life of Roman children, let's reflect on a life of unequal starts, how Roman childhood was a complex and often harsh mix of profound vulnerability, stark privilege, and predetermined paths that shaped their entire existence. Imagine looking back at your Roman childhood, whatever your social station. For many, it was a constant gamble for survival against disease, hunger, and the arbitrary power of the paterfamilias. For others, it was a privileged existence within a wealthy household, yet still constrained by rigid expectations and constant discipline. The most profound legacy of Roman childhood is its inherent inequality. From the moment of birth, your fate was largely sealed by your gender and your family's social standing. The absolute power of the paterfamilias to accept or reject a newborn meant that life itself was a privilege, not a right. infant mortality rates were shockingly high, ensuring that childhood was a period of profound peril for everyone. Regardless of wealth, this stark reality meant that even simply surviving was a significant achievement. For the vast majority of Roman children, particularly those from poorer families or those born into slavery, childhood was abruptly cut short by the demands of labor. Their earliest years were spent contributing to the family's survival, denying them the leisure, play, and academic opportunities available to the elite. Their lives were defined by work, not by learning or carefree exploration, a grim testament to the harsh economic realities of the age. Even for children of the elite, who did receive formal education, it was a harsh, disciplined, and often rote learning experience. The pervasive use of corporal punishment ensured that learning was often extracted through fear rather than fostered through curiosity. Their education was highly gendered, preparing boys for public life and girls for domestic management, reinforcing a rigid social order that offered little room for personal deviation. The shadow of slavery also permeated the very act of education, with enslaved tutors providing the knowledge, and enslaved children being trained for servitude. The concept of adolescence as a period of gradual transition and self-discovery was largely absent. Roman children were rapidly propelled into adult responsibilities through ritualized coming-of-age ceremonies for boys or early marriages for girls. This abrupt shift meant that the burdens of adulthood arrived suddenly, with little emotional preparation, forcing young Romans to quickly adapt to demanding roles. Despite these hardships, elements of Roman childhood persisted. Children did play, however simply, using what was available. Family bonds, though strained by high mortality and paternal power, were often deeply affectionate. The virtues instilled by mothers and tutors, pietas, gravitas, frugalitas, formed the moral compass for many, shaping their sense of duty to family, gods, and state. So, as you reflect on the grandeur of ancient Rome, remember the silent, unwritten stories of its children. Their lives, often brief and challenging, were a testament to their resilience and adaptation within a society that offered unequal starts. Roman childhood was a complex tapestry of vulnerability and privilege, harsh discipline and demanding expectations, all shaping individuals who would eventually build or sustain one of history's greatest empires. It truly makes you appreciate the protected, nurturing environment of childhood today, doesn't it? So to das waprfi, het truja, tiep tu ke chuong das vidu chuong oi, so tu bodabi won dasai. Jangcho, tiep tu ke chuong, so kua chuong tiep theo, tom le chi noi dong chuyen viet bang tieng, juos yeo kau kon le viet tieng Vietnam ki kafan mo, jiao cha chet trong chuong wan, nen. Tu train ford, so tu 145 Jiang Cholen Diep Dutsi. All right. As the last echoes of our journey through the realities of Roman childhood fade into the quiet of the night, it's time to gently bring our minds back to the present. You've walked through their homes, seen their struggles, and grappled with the profound differences in upbringing across millennia. It's a powerful reminder that history, in its quietest corners, often reveals the most poignant truths about human resilience and the long, winding path towards a more equitable world. Let the images of uncertain beginnings, terrifying infant mortality rates, and the rigors of education fade away, giving way to the quiet peace that surrounds you. The sense of ancient homes and the oppressive air of confinement fade, giving way to the familiar comfort of your own space. Let any lingering thoughts of unequal fates and the gentle pressures of childhood drift away, replaced by a sense of ease and peaceful reflection. The struggles and resilience of the Roman children of old are now, temporarily, part of your understanding, enriching your sense of history and the value of a protected, loved childhood. As your breathing deepens and your body relaxes, know that the stories of the past are always here, waiting patiently to be rediscovered, whenever you seek a gentle escape into the depths of time. But now, the journey is complete. Rest easy, knowing that another story has been revealed. gently, just for you.